I'm coming to you today from the island of Trinidad. Here's the thing I'm going to be talking about today. There's a whole lot going on with Trinidad that we're not hearing about in the news. As a matter of fact, Venezuela has threatened to strike Trinidad in retaliation if the United States strikes Venezuela. So get that through your head. The U.S. strikes on the ground in Venezuela. Venezuela knows that they can't retaliate against the United States. So they're going to retaliate against their tiny little neighbor with only 1.4 million people. So there's been a lot of chaos and panic going on here in Trinidad. Last night, there were a lot of people that were trying to get out of Port of Spain. I've talked to several people who said they've seen people panic buying in the stores. My taxi driver last night said his family was freaking out. And he said, we don't have any idea what to do in a war. We've never been in a war. We've only got 5,000 troops in our whole army, and they've all been called up. They're on the highest state of alert now. All of them are being sequestered on their bases, including the Coast Guard and the military and the Air Force and everything in Trinidad. We're going to talk about all of that and whether or not it's actually likely that the United States is going to strike in the next 48 to 72 hours. Before we do that, let's talk about Medicare. If you're on Medicare or you know somebody who is, you got a very short window to act. The annual enrollment period ends December 7th. After that, you're locked into whatever plan you have. And right now, you don't get any changes, no fixes, nothing until next year. And this is serious because premiums are going up and some Medicare Advantage plans are disappearing altogether. So if you don't review your coverage now, you might end up paying more and getting even less next year. Listen, when I helped my mom as she was trying to get on Medicare, it was a nightmare. Forms, confusion. I feel for people who are in what we call the third age, senior citizens, trying to navigate all these forms and everything. And most folks just don't have the time or patience to dig through the hundreds of plan options, hundreds, thousands, 24,000 different plan options out there. And so that's why I felt good about partnering with Chapter. Chapter takes the guesswork out. They're the only Medicare advisors who review every plan nationwide and then tell you exactly what fits your needs, not what's easiest for them to sell. It doesn't take long. You go through your options in like under 20 minutes, and it's totally free to you. On average, people who use Chapter save about $1,100 a year. So that's pretty significant. If you're already on the best plan, they'll tell you. So don't wait till the last minute. Call 636-812-6714 and talk to Chapter or visit askchapter.org/hotzone. But it's better to call them on the phone and just talk to a real person, I think. Get it done before December 7th, though, so you can spend the rest of the year not worrying about your Medicare and get that taken care of. So thank you to Chapter for sponsoring today's podcast. Now, the USS Gravely, which is a guided missile destroyer, paid a visit to Trinidad last week. And now you understand the USS Gravely is in any other part of the world would be a super aircraft carrier. In the U.S. Navy, it's a smaller ship. They are sending the Gerald R. Ford, which is a super carrier, over to this area, and it'll be here in another week. But there's already 13 ships and a nuclear submarine that are in the Caribbean Sea just off the coast of Venezuela. And that's plenty for what we might end up doing. So the fact that President Trump ordered the USS Gerald R. Ford to leave the Mediterranean and come to the Caribbean, and leaving the Mediterranean without a U.S. battle group for the first time in 25 years, that's a very serious sign. All of the B-52 bombers, B-2 bombers, B-1 bombers, all the F-35s that are flying combat air patrols over the airspace here, all of that would have been enough for a simple show of force. What they're sending over here is way more than that. And because everybody pretty much knows that we're not likely to be putting U.S. troops on the ground in Venezuela anytime soon, American people just don't have the stomach for that. And there's not really any reason to do it. What is more likely is a serious air campaign. And really what we want to take out are the drug infrastructure across Venezuela. The problem is, just like in Gaza, where Hamas has turned the entirety of the Gaza Strip into a giant military base with a bunch of civilians in it. The people who are running the cartel in Venezuela are the top brass and the government of Venezuela. And the thing is, this government is pretty fragile. Number one, they're illegitimate. Everybody knows it. There have been, of course, tremendous hardships visited on the Venezuelan people. That never goes well for the people in charge. In reality, you probably have a dozen guys who are running the show in Venezuela, and they're all very rich. So they don't want to give that up. They don't want to give up the golden goose, so to speak. However, taking out those 12 guys would bring a whole new day to Venezuela. And you don't even have to take out all of them, just take out a few of them, and the rest of them would be running for cover. They'd be taken off to Russia or Cuba or someplace like that, looking for asylum. When the media accuses President Trump of trying to foment regime change in Venezuela, that is technically not correct, because getting rid of Nicolas Maduro would be simply getting rid of a thug who is not the legitimate elected leader of Venezuela, so that the legitimate elected leader of Venezuela could move in and take over in his rightful place. Essentially, what Maduro did was performed a preemptive coup against the will of the people in Venezuela in the last presidential election by refusing to give up power. He's consolidated power, just like Vladimir Putin has, by making the men around him very wealthy, very powerful. And they know that wealth and power comes from Maduro. So it's a criminal enterprise. And they make a lot of money from smuggling not just drugs, and there are plenty of drugs, but people, weapons, fuel, and other contraband items that get smuggled out of Venezuela at the hands of the Cartel de los Soles, which is headed up by Nicolas Maduro. The Maduro regime vehemently denies that claim. He's saying Venezuela is completely innocent. There's no drugs here. And as I pointed out, they themselves have raided drug labs in Venezuela in the last couple of weeks. So on one hand, he's saying that they're pure as the driven snow. And on the other hand, they're raiding drug labs in their own country. So if the United States conducts strikes against Venezuela, it will be with the objective of taking out that narco trafficking infrastructure. However, because Venezuela has a very large army, almost 500,000 people, active duty and reserve forces, probably close to 500,000, largest army in Latin America. And they have some fairly advanced Russian and old Soviet and even some American weaponry. They've got a couple of F-16s that still work that were sold to them back when they were allies and not adversaries. None of those things stand a chance against the might of the United States military, of course. But if we want to take out that drug infrastructure, what the Pentagon is going to have to do is order strikes on air defense sites, missile sites, anti-ship missile sites, military bases, ports, airfields, and government buildings in order to create the conditions on the ground that are safe enough for strikes on drug targets inside Venezuela. So the article that came out in the Wall Street Journal talking about this, which the Trump administration has denounced.
We're about to take off. There are reports that you are considering strikes within Venezuela. Is that true?
No.
That you made a decision on that?
No, it's not true.
The thing is, he said that also right before we started bombing Iran. He said that also right before we started bombing the Houthis. No, we're not planning on that. So on top of that, in the days leading up to that little gaggle, he's been saying, we've been striking them at sea and then we're shortly going to be striking them on land. He's contradicting himself there, but these sources with the Wall Street Journal and Politico were reporting last night that President Trump had made the decision to start striking. He had not given the final execute command yet. They had determined which targets they needed to strike across Venezuela, ports, airports, military bases, and other sites, and plus all of the drug infrastructure. They had identified all the target packages, and the Air Force and the Navy are ready to execute that mission at any time. And they're only waiting on President Trump to say the word go. There was a tremendous amount of chatter flying around in the socials that said this thing's about to kick off in the next few hours. It doesn't make a lot of sense to kick this whole thing off before the Gerald R. Ford shows up with its whole battle group, because then why did you even send it over here to begin with? If it's possible we might need some of the combat power that the Gerald R. Ford represents, then we should probably wait until it gets here before we kick things off. And that probably is a week or so away. Some of the battle group is just now leaving Greece. Maybe a while. But as I said, the USS Gravely battle completed its visit here in Trinidad. So they landed at Port of Spain, and they've been doing joint drills with the Trinidadian forces. I don't know what exactly those drills entailed. As I said, the entirety of the Trinidadian military is only 5,000 guys and another 600 or so reservists. They've all been called up to active duty. They've all been called up to their bases. They had to be standing tall out in front of their bases at 6 p.m. last night for a inspection and everything. And they're now locked down on their bases, which is typically what you do right before a war starts. That's how it works. The Trinidadian Defense Forces have been raised to a state one alert. That's the highest state of readiness. And Venezuela is very upset at Trinidad for hosting the USS Gravely and for doing joint military exercises with the USS Gravely. As a matter of fact, Nicolas Maduro accused Trinidad of becoming an aircraft carrier for the United States. I understand the word picture, although we don't have any aircraft here that I know of. And all they did was allow a warship to dock in the harbor and did some training with them. But Venezuela is so upset about that they have threatened that if the United States attacks, Venezuela will retaliate against Trinidad. And that obviously has people here kind of worried. No way they would be any kind of force against the army of Venezuela. 1,000 men against 500,000 men. It's just not even close. On top of that, Trinidad is so close to Venezuela. This is Venezuela right over here. And the distance between the 2 points of Trinidad and the Venezuelan coast is about 5 miles. Theoretically, Trinidad would be in range of even small artillery or mortars. It's close enough that Venezuela could attack Trinidad with missiles, with artillery, to say nothing of aircraft or ships, actual ground invasion. So now Venezuela's military is not very expeditionary. What that means is they're not all that able to take their troops and move them somewhere else to another country. But Trinidad is close enough that it wouldn't take much. And it wouldn't take 100,000 troops to invade Trinidad with only 5,000 men under arms here in this country. However, that is one of the reasons why the Trinidadian government has been cozying up to the United States. They suffer quite a bit from the contraband that gets shipped out of Venezuela to Trinidad on the way to other ports. So there's a tremendous gang problem, a tremendous drug problem. Trinidad and Tobago have the highest murder rate per capita in the Western Hemisphere, I believe. And it's very dangerous in parts of Trinidad. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are a transshipment point for a tremendous amount of drugs, guns, people, even terrorists. So the Trinidadians would love some help from the United States. Many of them have been very happy to see the United States striking these drug boats and taking a harder stance against the drug runners and the smugglers. But the fishermen who make their living by paddling, getting these smaller boats, they're called piraguas, and taking them out to sea off the coast of Trinidad, they're not real happy about this. As a matter of fact, they've been protesting. Obviously, they're afraid because when boats around you are spontaneously combusting, you don't want that to happen to you. That's understandable. If the Trump administration decides to go hard against Venezuela, then it is going to have knock-on effects here in Trinidad without a doubt. And since I can't go to Venezuela without getting kidnapped, Trinidad was the next best option. Now, as I was recently, just a few weeks ago, in Guyana, this portion of Guyana on the west side, Guyana is bifurcated by this river right here called the Essequibo River. And it is a very wide river at the mouth, about 20 miles across. It's navigable for 60 kilometers upriver all the way to Bartica. And the river comes out of the Amazon region, flowing north. But everything in Guyana to the west of that river, Venezuela says it now owns. They call it the Essequibo region. Venezuela says, yes, that's ours. We've always owned it. Back in the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, they took that issue to court, and the international court made the decision that no, that land belongs to Guyana. Now, there's not a lot of people in there, about 100,000 people total that live in that entire region, which is the size of Florida. It's a big piece of land, and it's unbelievably pristine jungle. There's no roads in there. There's 0 roads between Venezuela and the Essequibo region. So Venezuela could not take over that part of Guyana by rolling tanks through there because it's just too extreme topography. But they want it because there's 11 billion barrels of oil just offshore of Guyana, and Venezuela wants to claim that oil for themselves. Trinidad and Tobago have had energy deals with Venezuela. Matter of fact, they inked one just earlier this year that would have given Trinidad access to a whole lot more natural gas than they currently have coming out of Venezuela. They actually had to get permission from the United States to make that deal, and the U.S. gave them a permission because Venezuela is under sanctions. So the United States said, okay, we'll look the other way if you want to break those sanctions by doing business with Venezuela to get some more natural gas, because Trinidad desperately needs it. Well, after the USS Gravely landed, Venezuela said, cut that off, no more. We're not going to do business with Trinidad anymore. And on top of that, we're going to make the prime minister of Trinidad persona non grata in Venezuela. They cannot come to Venezuela, to which the prime minister kind of laughed and said, why would anybody want to go to Venezuela? Relations between Trinidad and Venezuela are at the worst point that they've been at in many years. That brings us to another issue. There are currently probably 40 to 60,000 Venezuelans living in Trinidad and Tobago as refugees. They've fled their country as a part of that mass exodus that's taken place over the last 10, 12 years. Almost 10 million people most likely have left Venezuela. That's about a fourth of the entire population of the country has left. It's one of the largest population displacements in modern times since World War II. Some of those people have come to Trinidad and Tobago. You might say, well, 60,000, that's not that many. But in a country of only 1.4 million people, it actually is. They don't have the social infrastructure in place to care for a bunch of refugees. And so now that the relations between Venezuela and Trinidad have taken a turn for the worse, Trinidad is saying, we're going to deport all of these Venezuelan migrants back to Venezuela. I'm not sure how that punishes Venezuela that much. It really punishes the people who have voted with their feet to leave Venezuela. Trinidad's are saying, we're not going to continue to support all these Venezuelans if Venezuela is going to shut off its business with us. The last thing I wanted to talk about is if the U.S. strikes Venezuela, what are the likely scenarios here in Trinidad? Number one is the risk of some sort of kinetic retaliation. There's a low chance of that, but there is a non-zero chance of that. If Venezuela were to strike at Trinidad, I think the fact that the USS Gravely was just here training with the Trinidadian forces was our way of sending a message to Venezuela to keep their hands off Trinidad, because if they send some bombs over here, it's going to go badly for them at the hands of the United States military. So there might be some symbolic targets. Venezuela could strike at Trinidadian fishing boats, military assets, treading right up to the line of making an attack that would cause the United States to retaliate, but not quite crossing that line. Venezuela yesterday put out a call to Russia, China, and Iran asking for military assistance, saying, please help us. We're about to get attacked by the United States. All three of those countries have made statements that were in support of Venezuela. None of them are going to do anything of major consequence to assist Venezuela militarily. Russia has probably come the closest. We know that there have been some large Russian military cargo jets that have been landing in Caracas over the last couple of weeks. There's not been a lot of reporting on what exactly got off of those cargo planes, but we can infer that they were air defense assets, S-300s, S-400s. That is, as I have mentioned before, more likely because Russia wants to test those advanced air assets or air defense assets against Western hardware, F-35s, F-22s, B-1 bombers. The real reason why this is happening, obviously we don't need 13 ships or 15 ships and a bunch of super carriers. We don't need B-52 bombers and things to strike at drug assets, either onshore or off. We don't need all that hardware there. But if we're going to make a show of force, that show of force is not just for Venezuela. The show of force is for Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, and saying, this is what we're capable of. So in some ways, what we're about to see go down between the United States and Venezuela might actually have more to do with deterrence against those other adversarial countries. And Venezuela is just the playing field for this match, just like Ukraine is the playing field for the war between Russia and the West. Venezuela is very unlikely to get any significant military support. It's not like ships full of troops are going to be showing up from Russia in Venezuela. There's no Iranian battleships that are going to come over here and have a great naval battle in the Caribbean against the U.S. Navy. It's just not a thing. Not going to happen. The Russians might have sent anti-ship missiles to Venezuela, which could pose a threat to the U.S. ships that are offshore. We'll have to wait and see. Now, we've seen over the last 24 hours or 12 hours, really, American air power ramping up its presence in the region here. F-35s flying combat air patrols over this area, B-52s and B-1s and everything flying down from the United States and flying right along the coast of Venezuela. This is a strategy to prepare the battle space, because what they're doing is getting the Venezuelans accustomed to saying, oh, here comes some more American airplanes, and they always just fly right by us and flex their muscles and then leave. Just another day, just another day. One of those days, those planes actually turn south and start dropping bombs. So it gives us the ability to recreate a sense of surprise with the Venezuelans. So it's not strange to be seeing that. But what we saw yesterday does show that the time for action is getting closer, and that is GPS jamming and other electronic interference in this area. This is called the Gulf of Paria. This Gulf that is between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela is called the Gulf of Paria. The Gulf of Paria was being heavily jammed with electronic jamming last night. You can see that things are getting more and more serious. And so we'll just have to, I'll keep you updated. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so that when I'm about to go live, you can get notified, because the next few lives I do might be some real breaking news. We'll have to wait and see.